Parshas Tazria Mitzora discuss, among other things, the condition of tzora'as. It's a skin condition, and where the skin develops scales and gets malformed, different colors, different sizes, different manifestations, lesions, scales, etc. So first of all, what is tzora'as? Tzora'as is clearly a physical malady. Is it infectious? We'll talk about that. What does it come from? So Chazal, Gemara and Eiruchin and other places talk about where a mitzora or a tzarua, how this comes about. Most popularly, the cause that is associated with the effect of tzora'as is lashon hara, is speaking ill of others, and it derives from the word, or at least it's reflected in the word mitzora. It sounds like motzi ra, draws out the bad. There are other opinions about why somebody might be afflicted with tzora'as, besides speaking lashon hara. Could be because of murder, could be because of a shvuas shav, took an oath in vain, could be because of inappropriate sexual conduct, could be because of pride, could be because of theft, could be because of miserly behavior. The popular reason, number one, is because of lashon hara. Now, there is a condition that is commonly confused with tzora'as, and it's called leprosy. When I was in day school, in my youth, we said if somebody has tzora'as, if he has leprosy, it's probably not a very helpful thing to say. Although my understanding is that in the original rabbinic translation into Greek, it actually is translated as something with the word that resonates with leprosy. Classical leprosy is a bacterial infection, also referred to as Hansen's disease, infectious, spread by droplets. Sounds familiar, but the tzora'as that we're addressing does not appear to be spread by contact. Although it is worth noting that there are some Meforshim, Reb Yosef B'chorShor, Chizkuni, perhaps others, who say that a mitzora must isolate because others may catch it. That does not appear to be the dominant opinion. The Torah in Perek Yud Gimel, Pasuk Mem Vav, that's 1346, says, Kol yemei asher hanega bo yitma tamehu. All the days in which the affliction or the plague is in him, he will be unclean. He is unclean. Badad yoshev michutz lamachane moshavo. He will dwell alone. Outside of the camp shall be his dwelling. And outside of the camp means all of the camps. Machane, Kahuna, Levi, and Yisrael. He's an outsider, literally. He has to sit alone, and others can't sit with him. So why does he sit alone? So Rashi explains, Badad yoshev, shelo yihiu tameim yoshvim imo, that others who are tamei should not sit with him. V'omer Rabbeinu, and our rabbis have said, Man ishtana mishar tameim leishe badad. There is no prohibition for other people who are tamei from sitting with other than a mitzora, from sitting with others. So what's the deal with a mitzora? So it says, Hu hivdil b'lashon hara. He caused separation with his evil speech. Bein ish li'ishto, between a man and his wife. Bein ish li'reyehu, between one man and his friend. So avhu yibodel. So he also has to be separated. Now, let's talk about something we raised earlier about whether is he separated because he's infectious, or is he separated for another reason? So we did mention some opinions that he has to be alone because he has to be in isolation so that others don't catch his disease. That is not the dominant opinion. As a matter of fact, the Reb Yaakov Kaminetsky speaks about this expressly, and he says it's really not likely, he says it's impossible, that he is isolated because he's infectious. He cites a number of reasons. Number one is that he's not declared tamei, that is the mitzora candidate, is not declared tamei until he's inspected by a kohen. That's number one. Now you could say a kohen will say, okay, the disease has gotten to the point where it's infectious or not infectious, but there are also some exemptions. If someone's a chassan during his Shivas Yemei Mishta, during the 7 days in which Shavuot is said, he's exempt from being examined. So he could be walking around with his tzora'as and he's not declared tamei. Also during the holidays, during the regel, a Kohen does not inspect. If we were afraid of infection, that would make much sense. In addition, if the Metzora himself removes the sign of the tzoras, he pulls out the affected hair or the wound, etc., he's no longer considered to be tameh. Now, if this were a disease that has the potential to infect others, says Reb Yaakov, these conditions would seem to have little impact on the level of contagiousness of the disease. So Reb Yaakov concludes that this is not a disease that will spread. So why does he sit alone? So as Rashi says, he engaged in behavior that separated people. Reb Yaakov suggests an additional reason, not negating Rashi, but in addition to Rashi. He says this man has a problem with society. He may be causing problems in society. He may also be caused problems by society. He may be influenced by people negatively, and he has to sit alone in contemplation. Many of us have become very familiar with that phenomenon. Ultimately, Chazal say that the nega goes away, the affliction goes away, when the Metzora does tshuva. So, bidud, a very common term nowadays in Israel, used for isolation in connection with the coronavirus, bidud is mandatory as a way of forcing someone not to be distracted by society and to focus on his spiritual ill. Reb Yaakov adds that he may not only be a mazik of society, causing damage to society, but he may be a nizak. He may be someone who is damaged by society. What do we mean? Well, we know, for example, that in the morning, part of the brachas we say is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should save us from a bad friend, should save us from the influence of evil people or just negative people around us. We know that there's this notion of a shachen ra, of a bad neighbor. Oy l'rasho, oy l'shcheno. An evil person, woe to an evil person, woe to his neighbor. In other words, an atmosphere or an environment, rather, can have an influence on an individual, whether positively or negatively. Some people choose neighborhoods in order to be positively influenced, or that their children be positively influenced. Some people have a problem, for example, talking in shul. Now, many people go to shul not intending to talk when they're not supposed to. But if you sit in a row with a bunch of likable people who are chevraman, and they schmooze, it's extremely difficult not to engage in that conversation. Nobody wants to, or most people don't want to be perceived by their friends or by people they'd like to be friends with as holier, as holding themselves as holier than thou. So it's a challenge. Sometimes the answer is, you know what? I have to move my seat. I'm going to move to the front of the shul, where it is much less likely that I'll be disruptive. Most people who talk in shul tend to sit near the back. So somebody who wants to remove himself from that situation without engaging in what might be uncomfortable conversation with the people next to him and asking them to be quiet, especially if it's fruitless. So they'll sit in the front of the shul or on the corner or on the side, and somewhat self-imposed isolation, but that isolation can be a positive thing. And we know that that's a positive thing in certain circumstances, because we know that Klal Yisrael is referred to as Am Levadad Yishkon, a people that will dwell by itself. That's because the Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, have a unique culture that frequently is at odds with society at large. We need to protect ourselves. Now, the tension between being too much of something, too isolated or too exposed, that's something that everybody has to work out for themselves. But the tension is real. The potential for influence is real. And part of sitting as Badad Yeshev in isolation is, first of all, an opportunity to assess what's the best way for me to interact or not interact with society. And the other may be a cure for the remedy of an environment that could drag a person down. And by sitting alone, a person may actually have the opportunity to elevate himself and ultimately those around him. Have a good Shabbos.